Hello, my name is Fletus Poston, and today I would like to talk to you about endpoint backup and recovery software and how it can be a cornerstone in your CTI program. So, you're asking, why should I consider backup? Backup today is important for many different reasons when we're talking about the cyber landscape that we live in. It's effective to help us with our IR, our incident recovery. It's a great way to use for data hunting, and it helps you meet your compliance efforts if you're federally, state, or local compliance requirements. So let's understand the importance of endpoint protection in cyber threat intel. First, we have data recovery. Second is your threat analysis, then your IR, and your compliance. Due to the availability of our critical data in an event, it's imperative and important that we minimize the downtime and disruption to our business operations. So Fleet, you're asking, data recovery, is this at the endpoint, the server, and our cloud? It can be all the above, and it needs to be all the above. You need to make sure that you have a proper backup and recovery strategy that includes a 3-2-1, having 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations, with one of those being offline. So that could be a local external hard drive, that could be on a tape drive that you ship somewhere, or it could be physically downloading and placing the files in a vault somewhere that's not connected to the internet, or on a device that you keep air gapped or disconnected from the internet. Additionally, let's move into threat analysis. There's a lot of data that can be captured if you analyze your backup files. You can see insights onto the different activities that attackers have potentially done in your environment through threat hunting. It enables your security teams to analyze the malware that's on their box because it's included in their backup. It helps you identify additional attack vectors and implement effective countermeasures. These countermeasures could be placing files in a different folder structure, changing the permissions on those files instead of everyone, where you lock it down to role-based access control. It can also be putting app control in place in your environment to keep certain MSIs or executables for initiating if the user is successfully able to download them, transfer them from a USB, or get them through a drive-by attack from visiting malicious websites. During your IR, you have a quick and capability of allowing your organization to restore files and then regain control after security breach. I've mentioned that it's imperative that we keep local copies. If you were to be hit with a piece of ransomware that locks up your entire network area storage, or crawls laterally across all of your Windows laptops, if the only place you have that backup for those endpoints or that NAS is on another network connected device, the ransomware could find it. It could break it as well and encrypt that data, make it almost nearly impossible to recover, even if you get the encryption keys. Additionally, the growing concerns around California's privacy, GDPR, PCI, SOC 2 requires you to have industry regulated compliant data retention policies. These includes proper security around the data. Do you have policies in place to say you'll keep X amount of data? If it's 30, 60, 90, 1 year, 2 years. Also, do you have compliance and hygiene, data hygiene, to clean up that data when it's outside of your policies? For example, do you have data sitting in your SIM today that's older than 3 years? Do you need data older than 3 years to be searchable? Could you review your policy and it says you keep 365 days or 1 year? You could ship the other 2 year data to a cold storage, such as S3, put in Glacier, or into Azure Blob, and put it outside of your facility so that it's no longer searchable and it's not hot on a cheaper storage platform. This allows you to meet the requirements that you set forth by your organization for your governance, risk, and compliance team, from your legal requirements, and your customers. For those who operate in the cloud and have SaaS applications, this is also part of your SOC 2 Type 2. You can share with your organizations in your security, trust, and assurance packages or your data, how you retain your data inside of your four walls, if you have them, what you do with customer data, and how you back up that data and able to restore it in case they need it. So some key features of a backup and recovery software: that's your encryption, having incremental backups, and having your RPOs, your recovery point objectives. More and more data needs to be seen both encrypted in transit and encrypted at rest. So for the point of backup, let's talk about encrypted at rest. Are you using encryption standards such as AES 256 to encrypt your data? Do you have different keys for different users in your environment or different assets, such as your servers? Is the same key used across your environment? You may not want to do that. Incremental backups. Instead of doing a full backup nightly or weekly, you do an incremental backup. For example, on your endpoint, we can back up your files, or your endpoint backup can back up your files every 15 minutes, looking for the deltas between those files, and then backing them up in smaller chunks to save from having network storms and bandwidth issues in your environment. This change reduces the backup time and reduces the consumption of both the storage that you're writing your files to, as well as the network traffic in which you're pushing the files. Work with your executive teams to determine what is your recovery point objective. What is an acceptable amount of time if you are to lose data in the event of an outage, and ensuring that all that information is restored quickly. Is your RPO 15 minutes because you have high volume transactions? Is it 1 hour? Is it 1 day? Only you can answer that question. But from a cyber threat intel point of view, we need to understand the data that's both stored and written to, and how often it's updated, so that we have forensics capabilities in the event we are hit with a piece of ransomware or malware. So, I've been mentioning cyber threat intel. How do you integrate that into your backup program? With regular backup data, we are able to ensure data integrity and availability. This allows your CTI teams to look for patterns, anomalies, potential threats, while enhancing the threat intelligence capabilities. These capabilities will allow you, during your DFIR, your digital forensics, and incident response activities, to properly analyze and restore compromised systems, because you will have backups of those systems. This will minimize your downtime and help reduce the impact to operations. We've all grown up hearing of the CIA triad: your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability. We need to keep our data private. We also need to have integrity of the data in which we are sharing, and availability. Backup helps with two of those. If you've got proper encryption, you have the integrity of your files. It can also help with the confidentiality piece, because you know that your files are properly stored with the right keys. And then availability. If properly done with a validated restore, not a validated backup, your organization knows that it can reduce the downtime and impact to their operations by restoring that data against their RPOs, their recovery point objectives. We all know that organizations need data back quickly, but how quickly? What data needs to come back? Do you have in your incident response plans a proper data classification on what data needs to be recovered first, then second, and then third? Once you've done that, you have a better idea of how you can enable both the operations as well as your security team to properly investigate in the event that something happens. So let's leverage our endpoint data for threat hunting and incident response. You can take the backup copy of the server or the endpoint, the Windows or Mac, and do malware analysis. You can find the infected files or file, the executable, the MSI, the Trojanized doc file. And you can do malware analysis against it to determine against known signatures, known potential threats, and also understand the behavior. By understanding the behavior of the malware that you've been able to capture from your backup during your incident response, you have the ability to properly understand the threat vectors of your organization. This leads you into being able to analyze what does your user behavior look like in your environment. You can look at the user logs to determine when that executable, that piece of malware entered your environment. This could impact how we go about setting up new security controls. Do we put user behavior analytics in? Do we have a SASE tool? Do we add a secure web gateway? What additional technologies do we need to help protect our users and our organization? This leads you into the investigation that I've been talking about. You can reconstruct the events leading up to the incident because you have a validated backup. In this case, you're able to validate and restore the files to a clean image and do analysis to determine what happened leading up. This allows you to get your pre-mortem. What activities was the user doing and was the system doing when it was writing files to disk? You can identify the attacker activities. Did they have programmatic access? Was this opportunistic? Was this a drive-by? And also identify what threats were exploited, i.e. the vulnerabilities you had in your environment that the threat actor was able to use to get initial access. And then how did they get the exploit in? What was the command and control or C2 environment? And what version of your file was part of it? Your endpoint backups should be versioning your files. You should be able to look at the version of your file to determine which one was clean, which one was infected. And if you're continuing to back up over time, you can remove those infected files prior to restoring. This would allow you to ensure that when the data is put back on the C drive, D drive, or a respective server environment, you're only restoring clean files, as your CTI team can help you by doing the analysis and internal incident investigation. This allows for business continuity. It reduces the data loss. It helps you with data loss prevention. It helps you with a rapid recovery. And enables your DRP plans to be successful. We want to minimize the loss of data we have during a critical incident. We want to ensure that no matter what the disaster is, we do not lose data, or we lose as little data as possible. With rapid recovery, you're able to bring your backups in and restore them, minimizing the downtime to your finance team, your IT operations, your e-commerce, and get back to business operations as soon as possible. Ensure that you have a verified disaster recovery plan. Make sure there's comprehensive steps that outline, as I alluded previously, what's restored first. How quick do you need to restore that? Do you have the proper techniques and technology and personnel to meet those restoration times? And at what point is a backup no longer valid to recover? When is it too far past the retention period that it will cause more harm to restore than it is to start writing new? Your disaster recovery plan should outline all of this and should be tested during your tabletop exercises, during your DRBCP exercises. You can partner with your IT teams, your finance team, to understand what does it take to recover and how quickly can you recover while using the data that's collected from your CTI analyst and teams to analyze what happened by using the artifacts from your backup and recovery. We have to mitigate the impacts to our organization. I've talked about ransomware already, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. We all know what it's like for your files to be encrypted. You've heard stories or you've lived it. It's not fun to come in and find that Jigsaw has ran in your environment and all of the extensions now have a .fun. It's also imperative and important that we understand that data breaches can and will happen in our organizations. So to minimize those, we need to make sure that we are not restoring compromised data. Utilize your security team to analyze those files. Utilize the CTI knowledge that you get from your threat intel platforms, your open source intel, your MDRs if you have a managed detection and response team, or your MSSPs. They should be sharing data with you. And your internal team should be producing it as well. Lastly, systems will fail. We all run systems that are past their end of life, or have ran systems that are now ELL, end of life. If we are not cautious, we're going to assume that we can recover and come back up. So for example, if you're running a legacy Windows 12 server in your environment, does your IT team know that to restore that backup, they need to also lay down a Windows 12 OS? This is where app cataloging and asset inventory comes into play. Define these things, share these things, and articulate these so that you minimize your downtime, ensuring business continuity. So we've talked about so far the IR components. We've talked about how we go about handling data recovery. But now organizations also have to think about the compliance requirements of their endpoint data. Do you have HIPAA data? This is your healthcare organization, or any information about your employees that you have to protect. This is your PHI. Do you know where that data is stored? Is it stored outside of your HR management systems or your benefits platforms? Is it stored internal to your network, or is it stored with a third-party provider? Have you asked that third-party provider how they handle your data? Do they allow fourth-party access? During that fourth-party access, do you have confirmation that data is not copied, downloaded, stored in an unencrypted manner that could easily be scraped or seen or leaked? GDPR is imperative and important for us. All of us are doing international transactions these days, or likely to be involved in international transactions. Let me correct that statement. You may be doing business with EU organizations and EU citizens. Can you properly identify and destroy the data upon request of both the person, the organization, and any associated data related to them? Privacy is important. Security is imperative. We need to make sure we understand how we go about meeting the compliance of HIPAA and GDPR. Lastly, PCI DSS. Are you handling credit card transactions? Are you backing up those data? Do you have those data written to logs? And are you protecting them? What happens if you lose PCI data? There are fines associated with violating any of the 3 compliance regulations I've shared so far on this slide. You do not want to misuse and not store sensitive payment data in a way that can't be recovered. You don't want to lose it either. So make sure that you're either backing up your SaaS application's data and configs. Any transaction that's passing through your environment, you have proper controls in place. And ensure that you are utilizing your endpoints, your data management processes to ensure that the data can and will be protected both in transit and in rest. Optimizing your data effectively with CTI. Data deduplication. Let's reduce the storage requirements by eliminating duplicate data. Let's minimize our storage costs and bandwidth consumption by not writing the same file to 8 different locations. During your threat hunting, you can determine the connections that you have to your data lakes, to your SIEMs, and to your SaaS providers. Remove the duplication or add software or logic in place to dedupe. Make sure you're not writing multiple copies of the same file in places, some securely and some insecurely. Enable and follow a backup schedule. Maximize those schedules to ensure that your organization is always willing and able to recover, and that you're continuing to protect the sensitivity of the data that's being backed up. Ensure your data availability by minimizing your backup overhead. I mentioned earlier, 15 minutes may be too much for one organization, and you may need to change it to an hour, knowing that there's a potential to lose 14 or 59 minutes worth of data, depending on your interval. I've mentioned the 3-2-1 several times already. With cloud-based backup, make sure that you have other copies of your data that are not just in the cloud. Cloud backup is important because it's not in your environment, but you're also transferring that risk to your cloud provider. Ensure that they're making copies of it. Ensure that they're storing copies of it, and that you have the ability and availability to it. We may lose internet connectivity and you may not be able to reach your data. How would you go about restoring cloud-based backups if you cannot reach them? Include that in your incident response plans and in your BCP-DR plans. What is your contingency plan to try to restore backup data that's no longer locally stored? Going back to the 3-2-1. Have 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations, with one of them being offline or not attached to your local network. In the event that a piece of malware, a fire, a hurricane, or another natural disaster or disaster of any type does not impact your data recovery processes. So in conclusion, it's important that your endpoint backup and recovery software is effectively strategized, that you have strategies around it to enable your organization to minimize their impact from cyber attacks, natural disasters, by enabling a strong and important business continuity plan that is tested, not just written and forgotten about. Ensure you're meeting the regulatory requirements for the organization that you work with and the customers you support. It's critical to invest in protecting your data. You're enabling your organization to succeed with proactively threat hunting, looking through your backups and your data to know where data is stored, how it is accessed, who is accessing it, and how often it's accessed. So that when you do have an incident or a disaster, you're able to swiftly identify those anomalies and start your DRBCP plans to allow your organization to come back up better than it was, faster and more effectively, and at the same time it allows you to enable your organization to be successful if and when another incident happens, either from a cyber attack, a natural disaster, or an employee or system failure. This is Fleetus Poston. I appreciate your time, and thank you for your time today.